Good morning, everybody. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. Today, I'm providing a situational update on the district's response to COVID-19. I will start with some general announcements, and then we are going to talk about summer and schools in Washington, D.C. I'm joined by members of my cabinet who I will turn to for specific updates in their leadership areas. You noticed this week that we have changed the locations of our briefings, and I want to thank our friends at Gonzaga College High School, which is located across the street from our DOH headquarters, which is also our Emergency Operations Center. We have moved because 441, where we have been doing these briefings, is a polling location. It is a vote center. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time this morning reminding everybody that you have two ways to vote for the D.C. primary, and that primary date is June the 2nd, but you may vote right now. You may mail in your ballot, and you can request an absentee ballot by calling or downloading an app or emailing the Board of Elections. You may also vote in person starting today. And there are 20 vote centers across Washington, D.C. We have listed those vote centers on the map in front of you. And you can also go to the Board of Elections website at any time to check out these locations. What's different is that these locations are the only locations for voting in person. The 144 precincts that have been used in elections are all collapsed into these vote centers. So not only do you vote at these vote centers early, starting today, but you also vote at these vote centers on Election Day, June the 2nd. And you may vote at any of them. If you live in Ward 3, you can vote in Ward 2 or any of the other wards. So all of the vote centers allow you to vote your ballot, no matter what your home vote center or precinct is. So once again, early voting has begun. You may vote in person at these vote centers. The hours of operation are 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day through June the 1st, except Monday, except Memorial Day. And on Election Day, June 2nd, on Tuesday, June 2nd, the hours of operation of these vote centers is extended. It's 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So once again, you can go to earlyvoting.dcboe.org for more information. And we are reminding you to wear a mask or face covering, or there will also be ones available for you at the vote centers if you arrive without one. So thank you, and go vote, mail in or go in person. I also want to just show the district's experience with community spread and new cases in the district. We are reporting 105 new cases of COVID-19, bringing our total to 7,893. And sadly, we report that 418 D.C. residents have succumbed to the virus. We also report 12 days of a sustained decrease in community spread. Dr. Nesbitt explained yesterday why this metric is so important to public health and how public health officials track this information. And as we go into a 3-day weekend, please ensure you are doing your part to stop the spread of the virus. Remember that our stay-home order continues to be in effect, and we will provide an update on Tuesday in hopes that our trends hold through this long weekend. I also said that if those trends hold, that we would begin our phased reopening next Friday. And so there are a number of things that we want our businesses and residents to ask themselves in preparation for the beginning of the phased reopening. So I first want to turn to Deputy Mayor Falchicchio to talk about the reopen checklist that we're making available for our restaurants and retailers.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. So earlier this month, Mayor Bowser asked the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development to create a pilot program to allow retailers to do curbside and at-the-door pickup for the sale of goods. Previously, they had been able to do it just by mail order. So now we have a pilot program. It's actually called the Education Academic Retail Shop pilot program, and we've provided 20 waivers in locations across the District of Columbia for retailers to actually do at-the-door pickup or curbside pickup. And so what we learned from that experience and that application process is retailers need a little bit of time to think through what they need to get ready to reopen. And so we've put together a checklist, which is a before you open checklist for retailers, which allows them to think through a couple different parts of reopening. That includes the operations checklist, enforcement checklist, and closure plan. All of this is in order to give these businesses a head start on thinking through what they'll need to open. We also have asked the EARS participants, the pilot program participants, to give us some data about how they are doing in terms of sales and operations and additional costs or concerns that they had when they reopened. All of this with an eye on if the health conditions continue to improve, allowing more retailers to do the same in the first phase. And so far, like I said, we have 20 locations operating around the district, but we really think that this before you open checklist will allow others to think about when the phase one reopen begins, how they'll be prepared and ready to begin operations with that opening as well.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And so please, if you are a business owner, if you're a restaurant or retailer, take a look at what you need to be thinking about this week so you will be prepared for phase one reopening. I also mentioned yesterday that we would talk a little bit more about our unemployment numbers in the district, as well as unemployment claims and what's happening at the Department of Employment Services. So I've asked Unique Morris-Hughes to talk about that today, in addition to talking about our latest unemployment numbers. Unique.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. I appreciate the opportunity to provide you and the public with the situational update on unemployment insurance benefits. Since March 13th, we have received over 100,000 new initial claims, of which over 59,000 people have received payment thus far, totaling over $300 million in benefits that have been paid out. The Department of Employment Services, as previously briefed, has more than quadrupled its capacity in providing more customer service support to the general public to assist and aid with completing unemployment insurance benefit applications. Additionally, the Department of Employment Services has stood up 3 provisions under the CARES Act. The PEUC program, which is the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, that is the $600 plus up additional payment, which is currently being implemented and funded. All of the 59,914 individuals that are currently receiving payment are also receiving PEUC payments as well. Additionally, we implemented the PUA program, which is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. As of today, over 18,000 people have applied, and we are rapidly getting payments out as well. Additionally, we have also offered our extended benefit program, which allows individuals who have previously exhausted their unemployment insurance benefits to seek an extension. Now, this extension goes through the end of December of this year. So it's an additional 13 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits that individuals are eligible for that have previously exhausted their benefits. Additionally, we will be sharing our monthly unemployment rate reporting to the general public, where we have seen an increase in the unemployment insurance rate. The District of Columbia saw an increase of 5.1% from the reported rate in March, which brings us to about 11.1%. We also saw a decrease in over 65,000 jobs for the district, and that's in both the private sector and then the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Unique. Let me also share some very good news, and it's also a request for help from our community. Today, we are announcing a new grant program. And this grant program will allow us to extend our reach to vulnerable communities, as well as help us enhance our contact tracing programs by using trusted community partners to spread the word about testing and isolation programs and contact tracing. We know that the success of all of these programs will help contain the spread of the virus in the district. So we're announcing the 2020 DC Hope Community Grants, and this grant program will provide a total of $10 million in funding to support district nonprofits that can help advance and promote critical public health initiatives. And this funding is provided through the CARES Act, and the grants will be administered by the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs. Each nonprofit will be able to access the grant application beginning this Tuesday, May the 26th. So we will get additional information out in that grant application by Tuesday, May the 26th. Another community partner has asked us to announce a collaboration with his foundation, as well as Lydia's House and the Housing Counseling Services. John Wall, one of our Washington Wizards, and his family foundation is announcing 202 Assist. And this is a fundraising effort that will provide rent assistance to Ward 8 residents impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Lydia's House and Housing Counseling will work with the foundation to administer the program and disperse rent relief under the advisement and consultation of the DC Department of Housing and Community Development. Now I want to turn to what we know everybody is keen to hear, where we are with our summer plans. And we know that our young people are eager to get back to more structured environments, as we all are, to enjoy the wonderful parks and recreation facilities that we offer here in the district. So with that, let me start with DPR, and I will turn to Delano Hunter, the director of DPR, to say a little bit more about these activities. But we have structured two opportunities for summer camp. And one depends on how we progress through our phases over the summer months. And so let me turn to Delano to talk about what the department has planned for Camp at Home, and if we are able to get through phase two this summer, what a limited in-person camp might look like. Delano.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, and good morning, everyone. The Department of Parks and Recreation is pleased to offer a Camp at Home experience to approximately 5,000 district youth. Camp at Home is a blend of self-directed activities, digital content, and some online engagement. Think about arts and crafts, culinary activities, science experiments, and outdoor exploration. This offering will be free to district residents. It'll include an activity guide and all of the supplies that one would need to have a quality camp at home experience. And as the mayor mentioned, if we are able to enter into phase 2, we are pleased to offer a fun and sun camp. We anticipate serving 3,240 campers through 2-week engagements. This will have a heavy outdoor emphasis on socially distant activities and games across 27 locations.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Deputy Mayor, as well for working across all of our agencies that have something to do with summer and fun. And we'll take questions about that at the end. Next, I want to talk about our Summer Youth Employment Program, MBSYEP. And I don't have to tell you that we have a long tradition started by Marion Barry of serving young people during the summer months so that they are getting quality learning experiences that help them think about their futures and what they want to do for work. We will be offering MBSYEP in a modified way, but an engaging way, and beginning on June the 22nd. So I want to turn to Director Morris Hughes to say a little bit more about that.
Mayor, I really want to thank you for being a champion for MBSYEP. Deputy Mayor Khan, I also want to thank you as well for your leadership with SYEP. Like everybody who I come in contact with in the public that is excited about SYEP, I can safely say that I think we all are very excited about the opportunities that present itself for a virtual Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program. So beginning on June 22nd, 10,000 young people will have an opportunity to start their first day of work through the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program. For 41 years, the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program has offered workforce development training, skill building, and employment and career opportunities to our youngest Washingtonians here. As we adjust to our new normal, SYEP is up for the challenge. We will be hosting several virtual options for young people who have already applied, certified, and are currently going through the orientation process for SYEP. So a few important notes here. One, 90% of this program is virtual. What that means is that young people will have an opportunity to either A, intern virtually at either a host site or a community-based organization that DOES is currently partnering with. 2, through the Career Edge platform, the Department of Employment Services will offer over 200 hours of content for young people, from skill building to occupational skill training. And 3, some of our 22 to 24-year-olds will have expanded opportunities to work and learn important skills in the workforce. We have updated our website and provided a host of information and a plethora of information at summerjobs.dc.gov for young people that have questions about how their experience is going to be virtual and where their host site will be virtually. We ask you to visit your portal as we are updating your student portals continuously and around the clock. And 3, again, Mayor, I want to thank you so much for being a champion for SYEP.
Thank you, and thank you, Unique, for while responding to the unemployment crush of claims, also working with your team to transform the SYEP experience, which in a normal summer is Herculean, but especially so now. And I also want to mention that we will continue to consider organizations who want to partner with us. With our young people, especially in this virtual environment. You may find that we have some partners who didn't think they could do it and can do it in a virtual environment. So that is very good news. I also want to talk about summer school, and we have been, through Deputy Mayor Kine's leadership, working with all the LEAs across the District of Columbia on discussions about in-person learning, virtual learning, school start dates, and any manner of questions about reopening. So I want to thank you, Paul, for that work. And our largest LEA, of course, is the District of Columbia Public Schools, led by Louis Farabee. And I want to turn to Dr. Farabee to talk about summer school.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. DC Public Schools is proud to offer a virtual learning experience this summer for students from grades K through high school. For our K through 8 students, this will mean an enrichment opportunity with a focus on literacy and mathematics, and an opportunity for students to have hands-on experiences at home. High school students can continue to take courses. Also, middle grade students can as well. In addition, for those students that need credit recovery, this will be an opportunity to earn additional credits. We will also provide our extended year program for students with disability, along with supports for students for English language learners. We're also planning to ramp up in-person instruction. If we enter into phase 2, the plan will be to provide a summer bridge for a focus group of students. We've been thinking about the transition years for students going from grades 2nd to 3rd, students going from grades 5th to 6th, and then students going from 8th to 9th. We will provide a bridge opportunity to begin to build their network and relationships between students and students to adults.
Thank you, Chancellor. And so the only thing that I would add about the summer school, I'm not sure if you mentioned, we typically, I think, serve about 5,000 young people during the summer weeks of instruction, and about 2 to 4 hours of programming. And something also fun to talk about is the number of students who have worked so hard, and not just the students, but their families are looking forward to their graduation in preparation for their next steps. And I know DCPS has worked very hard on what graduation might look like. Chancellor.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, with our summer programming, you're correct, Mayor. It is typically a half-day program, and we're continuing to offer that in the same format, where students will have a number of hours in the morning, and then they'll have the ability to extend their learning in the afternoon. For the class of 2020, we want you to know that we have not forgotten about you, and we're looking forward to celebrating your graduation and your experience in DC Public Schools. Planning is underway to hold virtual graduation ceremonies in June. Each school will have its own virtual ceremony. Those ceremonies will take place on the regular scheduled graduation dates set for June. We know that traditional milestones for our seniors will look different this year, but we remain committed to having joyful student-centered graduation celebrations for the class of 2020. Our high schools are finalizing the details for how students will receive their cap and gown. We're also providing seniors with yearbooks and additional celebratory materials to, again, honor their time at DCPS and to celebrate them as they take their journey into college and career.
So stay tuned for DCPS about how to pick up your materials. We want to celebrate with you. We want to see you all over social media about how you're celebrating with your families and planning to stay in touch with your friends as well. I want to make also a very big announcement related to DC Public Schools, and that is a program made possible by a commitment from the James and Alice B. Clark Foundation. They are making a $10 million investment to the DC Public Education Fund to support DC Persist. And this is a new program that will provide students in the class of 2020 and beyond a guaranteed support network as they head off to college. So starting in 2020, 750 college-bound DCPS graduates will get connected with a DC Persist coach to help them navigate and transition into college. Coaches will support and check in with students regularly throughout the first 2 years of their college experience. DC Persist is the nation's first college persistence initiative led by a traditional public school system. So this is huge news. We know how important it is for our students to get to college. It's even more important for them to finish college, to prepare them and set them up for careers that allow them good paying jobs to live right here in Washington, D.C. So this is big news from the James and Alice Clark Foundation, good news for the D.C. Public Education Fund, for DCPS, and for our students. So congratulations and many thanks to everybody who's been working many months and many weeks to design this program and to secure this private sector support. So thank you very much. So finally, I want to talk a little bit about the next school year. And I want to turn to Deputy Mayor Kine to talk about some of his engagement with LEAs throughout our pandemic response, those discussions in the upcoming school year.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, and good morning, everyone. We have seen over the course of this pandemic an extraordinary collaboration amongst all of our public schools and all of the LEAs. And one of the things that we heard so loudly through all of our stakeholder engagement around the Reopen DC task force work for the Education Committee was how much families really value the stability that could be provided in any way, shape, or form as we look forward to a relatively uncertain fall for the schools. We know that first and foremost, health and health considerations and the safety of students and adults and faculty and teachers in the buildings is of primary concern. But families are also wondering about things like scheduling, if it is the case that we're not able to accommodate all students in the buildings at one time. And they're wondering whether we might be able to coordinate across our LEAs and across all our public schools and potentially even with our employers so that families do have that stability and certainty over scheduling as we look to these new ways of operating within our schools. I have been engaging extensively in my office with the Chancellor, his colleagues at DCPS, and with every single leader of every single charter LEA on a regular basis. And we are engaged in those discussions for the very purpose of seeing whether we can coordinate and align on scheduling. So to that end, we're pleased to announce that starting next week, we will release a family engagement survey, and we'll be conducting a set of focus groups to ask families what kinds of schedules they anticipate would work best for them. And our hope is that through that process, we will be able to build that kind of coherence and stability for families. In addition to that, DCPS has now announced that its start date for its school year will be August 31st. The bridge program that the Chancellor spoke about, should we be in phase 2, will take place in August, but the official start of school for DCPS will be August 31st. And we are also talking to our colleagues in the charter sector and at charter LEAs about whether we might be able to align on a similar start date with them as well. So stay tuned for more information about that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And that's our update, and we're happy to entertain questions. Sam?
Yes, Mayor. One group is, what we're hearing is that one group is saying that there will not be a return of students to in-person learning until there's a vaccine. What do you have to say about that?
Well,
the recommendation, as I understand.
Well, that wasn't exactly the recommendation. So what Deputy Mayor Kine just mentioned is that I think our phase 2 recommends some in-person learning with social distancing guidelines in place. And what we know is that means that we are likely to be able to serve fewer students in the school at the same time. So some of what the survey is going to ask families is what type of schedule just react to the scheduling options that have been that have been discussed. I don't know if there are any scheduling options, Chancellor, that you want to mention now that have been floated at DCPS for consideration.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. There are a number of scheduling options that we're considering, and we'll continue to get feedback from our families around what works best for them. And we're also having conversation, as the Deputy Mayor mentioned earlier, with employers. Some of that includes a hybrid approach for some students to continue learning at home, and for some students to continue in person, and then for some students to do both. For those students that would do in-person learning, we've considered the number of days, the number of hours in which we could operate to ensure we have appropriate social distancing, and also ensure that we maintain the ability to keep students and staff safe. And we'll continue to assess from parents what their interests are, and we'll plan accordingly.
Could I follow up on this? Apparently, the city lost Head Start funds. To what degree is that going to affect you in terms of social distancing, particularly for the young people?
Yeah, so first let me go back and just share a little bit about our budget for the 2021 school year. Thanks to the mayor's leadership and the investment in public schools, we were able to realize an increase in our budget in DCPS in a time where we know the city has been losing revenue. So this is tremendous for public schools, and again, represents a solid commitment. This commitment allows us to continue our investment in early childhood education, and we will provide the same number of opportunities and seats for students as we planned previously. And you also heard today that we remain committed to our summer offerings. I do know that some of our public charter schools are also exploring summer options as well. So families should know they should expect what they are accustomed to receiving from their public schools in the past, and we'll continue to elevate our service during this crisis as well.
So there are no cuts planned in this?
There are no cuts to early childhood education for seats for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and we remain committed to providing all the seats that families have applied for in our new early childhood campus at the Stevens campus, which will be first of a kind, where we'll provide service to students in grades 3 for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and then also for infants and toddlers.
Yes, Perry?
Yeah, can someone please explain a little bit more about this summer bridge program? Will it be required for 3rd, 6th, 9th graders? Would it be for all 3rd, 6th, 9th graders, or just some 3rd, 6th, 9th graders? And what date would it start?
Chancellor.
So the bridge for the rising 3rd, 6th, and 9th graders, we are planning for that to be optional. We have heard that many families are interested in this opportunity to begin to establish relationships. It is something that our schools have done in the past, and we found it to be really beneficial to assist students in their transition years. We are thinking that this would start in August, around August 10th, and run a 2-week period before the start of the school year on August 31st.
And the idea is they would be able to spread across the whole campus?
Yes, because it is one grade level among many in a campus, we believe that we have the capacity to serve students and also maintain safe social distancing.
And how many students on the outside would that be, Chancellor?
So that would be, thank you, Mayor, that would be approximately 11,500 students in grades 3, 6, and 9.
That's how many 3rd, 6th, 9th graders we have?
That is correct.
And why 3rd grade? We know 6th and 9th is a transitional year.
Yeah, so in many of our elementary schools, this is the grade level where students transition from one self-contained teacher for the year, and they transition into what we call departmentalized grade levels, which oftentimes begin in 3rd grade, where they have experience with multiple teachers. For example, you may have a teacher for language arts and social studies, and you may have a different teacher for math and science. And so that transition has been something that families has asked us to support students with, and we believe that this bridge experience will give students a boost in transitioning from grades 2 to 3.
So you will be able to accommodate all 3rd, 6th, 9th graders, but it is optional for them?
Yes, it will be optional. We have the capacity to serve those students, so all students choose to do so.
Thank you.
Mark?
Can I ask about the choice of the August 31st date for starting the school year? And if you could remind me, is that earlier or later than a normal school year? And I thought when you originally announced closing schools, there was some discussion of maybe actually starting earlier in August rather than later in August. So I'm just wondering about the date.
Yeah, so the August 31st date represents the date that we had previously planned to start school in our approved calendar. However, the summer bridge experience in August does represent an earlier start for students to the 2021 school year. And so to maximize the transition supports, we believe that it's important to give that strong start to that group of students prior to starting school for all of our students across the district.
And so that was already the date in mind?
August 31st.
August
was,
31st
yes.
for us, yes.
And so then, can you tell us or tell parents, when will you let them know what the school schedule will look like? When will they know whether their students will be going to school 1 day a week, 2 days a week, virtually, in person? When does that get resolved?
So as we collect more information from families about their needs and preferences, we will provide back the data that's collected and how that information has been used to inform scheduling options. We are seeking consistency across DCPS. As the Deputy Mayor mentioned earlier, we will survey families beginning next week, and the goal is to coordinate across the city as much as possible. And as soon as we receive that feedback, we'll start to digest that information and come back to families on what our options are for scheduling.
So do you have a target date when they may know?
I believe that could be as early as June, but it could be July as well.
James?
Mr. Hunter, given the digital divide in this city, what are you going to do in terms of your Camp at Home program for those who don't have ready access to Wi-Fi or the internet?
Thank you. Great question. It's actually a blend of activities. So it doesn't rely solely on a virtual experience. That will be a component, but a small component. What parents and youth can expect from the Department of Parks and Recreation, you'll be given all of the supplies that you need to facilitate this activity. So again, if you're doing jewelry making, you'll have the items. If you're doing origami or another arts and craft, you'll have all of those items for that self-directed activity. Just a small portion of the programming content will be facilitated online.
And Unique, do you want to say more about what DOES is doing around supporting young people with access?
Yep, certainly. So we recognize that there may be youth that don't have access to a device. And so first of all, our Career Edge platform is accessible via laptop, tablet, or phone. So a young person can use any of those sorts of devices to access this Career Edge content, which I mentioned previously has over 200 hours of workforce development content available. Additionally, through the kind support of the Citibank Foundation, we have been getting for the last few years a grant, and this year we'll be using some of those grant funds to support purchasing devices for young people who don't have them. It's our intent to make sure that every young person who wants to participate in the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program will have the opportunity to do so.
Yes, Sam.
Could you give us an example, Ms. Hughes, of what somebody would do? I'm trying to visualize it. What would a summer youth do for company A or B?
Sure. So this is the fun part about this, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So just like many of us are working virtually and remotely, there are some businesses like the federal partners that we previously highlighted that are willing to take those interns and their job that they would be doing in person, they'll be doing virtually. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we've lined up several different cool opportunities. One of them is reading recovery. We understand that because young people may have are not necessarily engaged in person with learning, that there may be an opportunity to do some literacy recovery work virtually, either with having an SYEP intern tutor, a younger student, or doing a small group reading, helping younger students tutoring that way. That's one option. The other option is that there are lots of different occupational skills that we can provide training for. Young people are particularly interested in IT, and so there are IT trainings and certifications that young people can gain virtually. All of those sorts of activities will be part of the Summer Youth Employment Program, just primarily virtually.
And you said 90%. What's the other 10% going to do?
So the MBSYEP goes up to the age of 24, and we do have a select group of 22 to 24-year-olds should we move into stage or phase 2 of reopening that may have an opportunity to do some work in person. That would be exclusively for our 22 to 24-year-olds, and that's a finite and select number of young people. But primarily the program is virtual this summer.
Okay, I'm going to just take some questions from the phone, and I'll come back to you, Perry. Amanda Gomez. Amanda Gomez.
Good morning. Good morning. Hello. So I have 3 questions today. My first is, if someone goes to the voting center in person and needs a mask, or maybe they're not wearing the right one, will they be provided one?
Yes. A few weeks ago, I think we updated here about a request that we got from the Board of Elections and Ethics about certain things that they needed at each voting center, and we provided them several weeks ago, including masks, hand sanitizer, and I think some other cleaning supplies. So they have masks, yes.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Two of the voting centers, I understand it was Greenleaf and Malcolm X. They were seasonal shelters that D.C. continued to use to make more space in the other homeless shelters. So I'm wondering now where were those residents moved to? Was a new location secured, or did they go back into the existing shelter system?
I don't know specifically where every person went, but I don't know that answer specifically. So they were offered shelter.
Okay, but no, your understanding is no new locations were secured to make more space in the existing shelter system.
Well, we, as you know, already have added shelter capacity, added capacity for quarantining purposes. So, and a number of people who needed quarantining from a congregate shelter have used those.
Okay. I understand that you're facing priority populations, but can you tell us what percentage of our total positive cases have been successfully investigated by contact tracers?
I'll have DOH contact you with that number, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tisha Lewis from Fox. Tisha?
Hi, Mayor Bowser.
Hi.
It's Tisha from Fox. I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first question is, we're hearing that D.C. teachers are planning to mobilize and could mobilize and strike if a list of stipulations concerning returning to school are not met. On that list potentially includes not returning back to the classroom until there's a vaccine for COVID-19. What's your response to that, and are you aware?
I've never heard of that, but I can turn to the chancellor to talk to you about the discussions we have had with the teachers union.
Thank you, Mayor. Also have not heard that and have been in regular conversation with the president of the Washington Teacher Union and Liz Davis, and we continue to collaborate on reopening strategies, and it's important, as I mentioned earlier, to get feedback from our families, but also get input from our teachers as well what a strong start would look like and how DCPS would proceed with ramping up reopening schools. And those conversations have been positive and collaborative, and we anticipate that will be the structure and the tone in which we'll continue our conversations.
Okay, and then a second question for the mayor. Specifically, we're told local school budgets show an average loss of about 3 early childhood educators per school, including teachers and aides. Is this staff reduction due to the loss of the Head Start funding? And how will the loss of educators impact pre-K 3 and 4 programming in an era of social distancing?
I'll ask the Chancellor to talk about local school budgets and how individual schools budget. There's a lot of autonomy involved, but you heard earlier that our investment in public education has increased at a time of decreasing revenues. And the Chancellor has also already addressed how 3- and 4-year-olds would be served. But let me ask him to talk about specific school budgets.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Again, through the generous investments in public schools in D.C., the budgets that school principals and their local schools advisory teams develop in January, February, and March are the same budgets that schools have today. As relates to early childhood education, we have restructured our support model where some of our positions that were previously assigned to the schools are now managed centrally in alignment with our cluster support model. So there could be some differences in those positions at schools. And then secondly, for the schools that have a lower percentage of students that are Head Start eligible, they could see some shifts in their services as well. But again, we will maintain the same number of early childhood education seats and the supports necessary for students to receive a high quality experience.
Thank you. Sophie Kaplan.
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor. So yesterday it was made clear that the recommendations from the advisory committee were just that, recommendations. So I'm wondering how much do you plan to deviate from the framework that they gave yesterday?
Well, we are reviewing all of the recommendations very closely. There were, as you know, members of the government and community that helped lead those committees that made recommendations to the steering committee. So we're going to look through them very carefully and operationalize those recommendations that the government is going to take up by order. And likely we'll proceed with that by phase. Okay. Ashraf?
Yes, good morning, Mayor Bowser. I have 2 questions. You've been very clear from the start about going at a fairly conservative pace on reopening, following the numbers, and even yesterday as you started talking about reopening, you made it clear this isn't going to be an on-off switch. It's not going to go back to normal right away. That's very much in contrast to the kind of sense of urgency to reopen coming out of the White House. Does that mixed messages or difference between in tone and pace hinder your ability to keep your own people patient and keep the pace slow? How does that affect things? And my second question is just, what is the nature of your office's communication with the Oval Office? Is there a regular something set up? Is it in the context of the governor's calls? Is there some sort of bat phone hotline to the Oval Office if necessary?
Let me start with your first question about pace and contrast. I think what you might notice is that we are following in part the gating criteria, or at least the gating concept established in the White House Task Force's Reopening America. So being able to identify decreases in transmission, the capacity of hospitals, and also making sure that we can trace and isolate infected people who become infected is very much a part of the gating criteria that we've been discussing for many weeks. I think you might also know, if in the Reopen Advisory Group's report, how pleased, I don't know if it's the right word, but how much our people in D.C. have embraced the approach that we have taken. And I won't remember the numbers off the top, but I think it was over 80% of people either think that we have taken the exact right approach, and others wish that we had taken a stricter approach. So DC residents want us to follow the science. They want us to do the things that are right for the health of DC residents and vulnerable residents. They recognize that we have a special responsibility to take care of our vulnerable community. But they also know that following a measured and phased approach will allow us to get back to school. It will allow us to advance in phases. And I think that's exactly what we're hearing at the White House, that we want kids back in school, we want to go back to our special events, we want everything open. And the way to get everything open is to have a measured and phased approach. You ask about communications, and I have to tell you, we try to be aggressive about all of our communications with our partners. When I became mayor, I established a new office in D.C. government for federal and regional affairs. You've probably heard me say this before, but every jurisdiction in America had a Washington office, and here we were in Washington and didn't have a Washington office. And that office's job is to work with the Congress and the administration and our regional partners. And so, yes, I have participated in the governor's calls with the White House, and I have also had direct calls with members of the administration and the president. Yes, Michaela?
Hi, Mayor. Actually, building off of that last question, I'm hoping you can expand on a topic you touched on during yesterday's press conference regarding July 4th. The Park Service is continuing to plan for a 4th of July celebration on the National Mall per the President's request, but the Reopen DC report that came out yesterday says that no more than 250 people should gather in public spaces through phase 3 of reopening. With July 4th just a little more than a month away, do you have the authority to say ban a mass gathering on the mall if we're not past stage 3 at that time? And have you spoken with the president or his administration regarding the 4th?
We're examining a number of options to discuss with the administration about what would likely work with where DC is in those health metrics. And all of those things are kind of very early in the way that we're thinking about things. Our chief of police is also concerned about being able to monitor crowds, and he's going to make some recommendations to me that we will discuss with the Department of the Interior. Yes?
If we continue into remote learning in the fall, do you expect attendance policies to change now that we're situated? And for credit recovery this summer, will attendance be taken?
Chancellor.
So we are in regular conversation with Superintendent King and the Office of State Superintendent. There are policy modifications in discussion and in development that will be shared with LEAs across the city soon, we anticipate. For DCPS specifically, I can imagine there is a process where we would ask students to log on to our student information system daily as a means for checking attendance and ensuring that we account for student attendance daily. However, I think the attendance by course or by class may be a little bit more challenging and may be a practice that we abandon. Students, again, have the opportunity, you asked earlier about credit recovery, to take courses throughout the summer towards credit for graduation. And as students log in, we will take attendance for those students accordingly. And then we continue to partner with CFSA for any students that have been chronically absent or have been difficult to locate during this time period.
Per courses?
So in terms of course by course, class by class, we are hoping that the nimble policies as it relates to attendance during this health crisis would allow for DCPS to take attendance for the day for students in lieu of attendance by course or by class.
Perry, if I can just add on to that, just as a reminder, in this city, as you know, OSSI, the State Superintendent's Office, actually determines the attendance of policy and what's acceptable for attendance. So it's very clear, and it's a very important question, but it's very clear that schooling is mandatory. We have every expectation that teaching and learning will continue for every single child, every single student, as we have through this time. Next year, we are adjusting our attendance policies, and we'll have more information on specifically what that will look like in the coming weeks.
Really, Perry? We don't know. And so I actually, before you asked that question, I made a note on my paper here that says unknowns. Typically, we would come in and we would have every one of these things that you've asked us about. When is this going to happen? We would know all the answers to that. And these very capable people around the table would not have any parent left feeling uncertain about what's going to happen on August the 10th. But the fact is, we are following how this virus is moving around our city, our ability to contain it, and how well we can open up slowly. And that means that we can do some things that we haven't been able to do for the last 2 months, but we can't go crazy. And if we think that if we're able to adhere to the guidelines that come with phase 1, that we'll be able to move into phase 2. And so part of the reason why you have some options here for phase 2 that start in August is because we're hopeful that we'll be able to get there. That's the long answer to your question. Yes, Mark.
Mayor Bowser, a quick question on voting.
Yes.
Have you voted yet, and how do you plan to vote?
I will vote at a vote center, and I haven't voted yet.
And then what you somewhat just touched on it in your answer to Perry, but what do you say to parents who are stressing out? They're worried about just the logistics, as you all have already mentioned, of scheduling, of daycare, of work, and whether or not if they have siblings in the house, whether their siblings would be on the same schedule when school goes back. What comfort or assurance can you give them as they wait?
This is part of the reassurance that we're giving them, is that we didn't come out here and lay down a plan and say live with it. So part of the reason why we're releasing a survey is to help the planners in our public schools answer some of those questions. And so to the extent possible, the program that they will release would have addressed a lot of those questions.
But can you give them any indication as to when they'll be able to start planning? I mean, I know the chancellor said maybe June, maybe July. Do you hope to have an answer for them? Have you set it?
I don't, and I can't set it. I know that what we're going to see is we're going to see what people tell us, and I think there's still probably a lot of work to do around facilities planning. There's a lot of work to do with our workforce. We still have some work to do. What we can say for sure is that we will start school rather in person or virtually on August the 31st. It's mandatory. Thank you. There are 3 options. There are currently options for in person. I think that's what DCPS is at least is contemplating, that some kids may be in a distance learning posture, and then there will be some modified schedule for everybody else.
Can I follow up on unemployment? One, the 100,000, what is the total population number, what percentage does this reflect of the total number of employed people in D.C.?
Let me confirm that number for you. I may need to follow up with the exact number of those employed in the district.
John, I think the deputy mayor.
In terms of the total jobs in the District of Columbia, there's about 800,000 jobs in the District of Columbia. 70% of those are in the private sector, and the other 30 being in the government sector.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then, so as we see this, we do see, it appears from your numbers that the number of applications are somewhat declining in the past couple of weeks.
They are.
But we still see this gap of people who have not been paid yet, 40,000 people who are still waiting. How long have some of those people been waiting, and why are they still waiting?
Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to respond to this. So some individuals have very complex situations. They may have wages in another state. They may have a regular full-time employer, but have they're part-time, self-employed, and they're seeking benefits for their part-time self-employed work. We have some individuals that are just not eligible. They haven't recorded enough wages in the base period that we have to dig through and go through each individual claim. So it takes time for us to process. We usually have our own internal service level agreement of about 21 days to process a claim, with the majority of our claims being processed in 14 days. We're about 65% of the claims processed fall in 21 days. So we know that there are individuals that have not been paid, but we have to review literally every single claim that's processed, and it just takes some time. Additionally, we have staffed up and we have some additional capacity in terms of call takers, those that respond to email. We're currently in the process of staffing up our adjudication staff to make sure that we have more bodies and more people processing claims as well.
And Mark, let me just add to that. You'll notice with the weekly summary that some of those claims came in last week. Almost 5,500 came in last week. Another 5,500 came in the week before. So in just 14 days, we have had 10,000 claims, which is well below the 21 days the director just mentioned. The week before that, just outside of the 21 days, there were 6,000 claims. So just in the last 3 weeks, we're looking at over, looks like almost 17,000 claims that came in that are still in the window of our expected adjudication period. Now, the ones that are older than that are likely to fall into the category that the director just mentioned: complicated, need more information, or may not qualify, but are still in the process of adjudication and, what's the word I want, appeal. Yep. So those are, that's one reason. Now, when I look at that number, I say to myself, wow, we still had 5,000 claims come in last week, which suggests to me that people who weren't impacted at the early part of the pandemic response are becoming impacted now. So it shows you how significant this change is. What the director mentioned earlier is that in February of this month, we were at just over 5% unemployment in the city among DC residents, and we had dipped in some parts of our city where we've had double-digit unemployment for years, and we were beginning to dip. Now we're at over 11% unemployment, which is another indication of how widespread the job loss is because of this pandemic.
And Director, I've asked you every time you've come, can you tell us how many have been denied or how many are in the appeal process?
So we believe there's somewhere around 18,000 that are in the appeal process or that have been denied. One of the charges that I had was to make sure that we provided enough technical assistance and give people an opportunity to work through and resolve their claims, and so we've done that. We normally don't do a number of touchbacks, But given the dire circumstances of some of the claimants, we're working with them to try to get them out of the appeals process.
Okay, Sam?
Yes, Mayor. Yesterday we talked to a restaurateur at a place called Montmartre on Capitol Hill, and he said he was going out of business even though they can, I guess have some outdoor dining. He said because he could only have 5 tables outside and you can't survive on 5 tables. So I've heard in some restaurant areas like Adams Morgan, they're asking if it's possible to shut down the streets at high restaurant times so that they can have more tables outside so that they can make more money to survive. Any ideas on that?
Well, you probably also noticed, Sam, that was one of the recommendations that came out of the Reopen Advisory Group in a number of the committees for restaurants, for open spaces, and in transportation, all addressed how we can have more space for social distancing, be it for restaurants or for recreation, and for retailers. Keep in mind that many of these corridors not only have restaurants, but they also have retailers. So I have tasked my team to come up with some recommendations. Some of them may be piloted and could happen quickly. Others of them will require a little bit more long-term planning. But I would agree with that restaurateur to say, how can we spread out a little bit more to give them an opportunity to have more tables, give people the opportunity to move around more freely as well.
And finally for me, the next holiday obviously is Memorial Day. No parade this year, but does the city have any plans? Because people may just show up to see the memorials or whatever. Is there any particular plans given this holiday that starts in a couple of days?
We don't have an event, a city-sponsored event for Memorial Day, and I know typically people have spent it with their families and friends and barbecuing and going out to public spaces, and we want people to continue to do that. Maintain your social distance. We strongly discourage any big backyard barbecues and the like. Mind the 10-person limit because that is going to help keep you and your family safe. Yes, Annalisa. Is Annalisa there? Okay, Debbie from WMAU? WAMU? I'm sorry, did I say that wrong? WAMU? Debbie?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, Mayor Bowser. I have a question about learning loss. I know a lot of educators and parents are concerned that the time away from school has resulted in steep learning losses, especially for students with disabilities and students from low-income families. I think there was some hope that starting school early would allow for some time to recoup that loss. Is there like a plan in place to address some of those losses, given that school won't be starting early?
I want to talk about that, Paul. So let me just repeat that. I know it was hard to hear. I think your question was, people are concerned about reading loss. Is there an opportunity to address that for students with disabilities?
Thank you. And students from low-income families, yes, that's correct.
And students from low-income families.
Yes, thank you for the question. It is clearly one of the most important issues that we are thinking about and grappling with. We assume that given the nature of the quick transition into learning at home, that students will experience some learning loss over the course of this time. And we have a few plans in place for next school year in order to work on addressing that just as a city. So first and foremost, it is our expectation that schools and school systems will actually build in some additional time for teaching and learning next year. And we know through all of our conversations with DCPS and charter LEAs that many schools are already intending on doing that by extending the time that students are attending school over the course of a day, potentially running some work on Saturdays, thinking about their overall annual calendar, because we do believe that students will actually need some additional time to support and sustain the work that they're doing. Secondly, we are talking about setting an expectation that schools will run no-stakes diagnostic tests at the beginning of the school year, just so that they all can understand where the students are and what their needs are as they come into the new school year. And that will help us understand as a city what other supports might be necessary that we could begin to provide. So we're beginning to set a set of expectations with our colleagues in the public school system, and they do involve things like some additional time and also just deepening our understanding. And I'd like the Chancellor to talk a bit about DCPS's approach too.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So DC Public Schools, as the Deputy Mayor mentioned earlier, is planning to provide additional learning time throughout the school year. We believe at this point that would be an additional time for students during the school day, and additional school days during the year. We're also working to provide additional learning time either before school, after school, and we're also exploring the possibility of offering some Saturday learning experiences, which is one of the strategies that many of our schools have implemented in the past and seen great success. But I also want to be really clear that while school for our students will conclude on May 29th, we will still continue to make available resources for families throughout the summer to continue learning. And the DCPS team will have intensive professional development throughout the month of June to take what we've learned from our families and the feedback we receive of how do we get better with serving students doing this learning at home mode, and how might we best serve students in a hybrid approach as well, along with the social emotional supports that we know students will need as we think about transition to in-person learning.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your questions.